The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years, and in all that time, they had never once considered that they might be wrong about anything. 12 species sat at the great table in Sanctum Station, each one ancient beyond human understanding, each one convinced of their own superiority over the younger races that crawled through the galaxy, like insects beneath their feet. The Volcari were the oldest among them, their scaled bodies shimmering with colors that shifted like oil on water, their 4 eyes seeing not just light but the very fabric of space itself. The Keth were beings of pure thought, housed in crystalline shells that hummed with psychic energy. The Dominarchs of Ilthus breathed methane and considered oxygen breathers to be barely worth noticing. And then there were the humans. The Council had first detected humanity 300 years ago, when primitive radio signals leaked out from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. They had watched with mild interest as these strange bipeds launched themselves into space on rockets powered by controlled explosions. And they had laughed at the absurdity of it all. They burned fuel to escape their own gravity. Ambassador Eula Sorn of the Velkari had remarked at the time, his mandibles clicking with amusement, like animals fleeing a forest fire by running through the flames. The Council had decided then that humanity was no threat and no opportunity. They were simply too primitive to matter, too chaotic to organize, too violent among themselves to ever pose a challenge to the established order. How wrong they were. The trouble began, as so many troubles do, with greed. The Valkyrie Dominion had expanded too quickly across their sector of space, consuming resources faster than they could be replenished. And now their deuterium reserves were running dangerously low. Deuterium was the fuel that powered their civilization, the rare hydrogen isotope that made their reactors burn and their ships fly, and without it, their entire empire would grind to a halt within a generation, and Earth's oceans were full of it. Ambassador Sorn stood before the Council with his proposal, his voice smooth and confident as he explained the simple mathematics of the situation. Earth's oceans contained enough deuterium to power the Velkari Dominion for 10,000 years. The humans had no way to stop them from taking it, and the extraction process would only render the planet uninhabitable for a few centuries at most. The humans can be relocated to orbital habitats, Sorn assured the Council, waving one clawed hand dismissively. Those who survived the transition, anyway. Acceptable losses for the greater good of galactic civilization, would you not agree? The Council deliberated for exactly 9 minutes. 9 minutes to decide the fate of 8 billion souls. 9 minutes to condemn an entire species to displacement and death. 9 minutes to make the greatest mistake in galactic history. The vote was unanimous. Humanity had no seat at the table, no voice in the proceedings, no way to defend themselves against powers they did not even know existed. The motion passed, the orders were given, and the Velkari Armada began its journey toward Earth. 400 warships crossed the void between stars, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a continent in half. Each one crewed by soldiers who had never known defeat. Each one absolutely certain that this mission would be the easiest of their careers. They arrived on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. The first thing the humans saw was darkness as the Volkari ships blocked out the sun, their massive hulls casting shadows across entire cities. The second thing they saw was the broadcast that appeared on every screen. Every phone, every device capable of receiving a signal, a Velkari commander, his scales gleaming with arrogance, spoke words that would be remembered for centuries. People of Earth, you have been deemed a lower species by the Galactic Council. Your planet's resources have been allocated for extraction. You will evacuate to designated holding areas within 48 hours, or you will be removed by force. Resistance is not advised. And then the transmission ended, leaving 8 billion humans staring at their screens in stunned silence. But only for a moment. What the Valkyrie did not understand, what the Council had never bothered to learn, was that humanity was not like the other species they had conquered over the millennia. Those species had been peaceful, having evolved on gentle worlds where cooperation was the key to survival. They had never needed to develop the darker instincts, the survival mechanisms that came from living on a planet that actively tried to kill you. Earth was different. Earth was a world of predators and prey, of ice ages and meteor strikes, of plagues and famines and endless, grinding competition for survival. Every human alive was the descendant of ancestors who had fought and bled and died to pass on their genes, who had faced extinction a dozen times and refused to accept it, and buried deep within every human heart, sleeping but never gone, was something the elder races had bred out of themselves long ago: the capacity for absolute, unstoppable, world-burning rage. The Valkyrie expected fear. They expected submission. They expected the humans to accept their fate with the quiet resignation of a species that knew its place in the cosmic order. Instead, they got General Sarah Chun from a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The commander of the hastily formed United Earth Defense Coalition sent her own broadcast to the alien fleet. "You came to take our home. You came without warning, without negotiation, without any attempt to treat us as equals. You called us a lower species and expected us to simply accept it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was cold as the void between stars. "You should have brought more ships." Across the planet, something ancient stirred in human hearts. In cities and villages, in mansions and slums, in every corner of every nation, people who had spent their lives disagreeing about everything suddenly agreed about one thing: they would not go quietly into the night. Weapons were pulled from closets and basements. Old soldiers who had hung up their uniforms decades ago put them back on. Teenagers who had never held a gun learned to shoot in hours. Grandmothers who remembered stories of resistance and rebellion taught their grandchildren how to fight an occupying force. The Valkyrie had expected to conquer a planet. Instead, they had awakened a species. And high above, watching from their flagship with growing confusion, the Valkyrie commanders realized that something was very, very wrong. The humans were not evacuating, not surrendering, not behaving the way conquered species were supposed to behave. They were preparing to fight. Commander Velthax turned to his tactical officer, his scales flickering with the first hint of uncertainty. "What are they doing down there?" The tactical officer studied his screens, his four eyes blinking in disbelief. "They are arming themselves, Commander. All of them. The entire population appears to be mobilizing for." He stopped, unable to complete the sentence, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "For what?" Velthax demanded. The tactical officer looked up from his screens, and for the first time in his long career, there was fear in his voice. "For war, Commander. They are preparing for war against us, all 8 billion of them." And in that moment, though he did not yet know it, Commander Velthax became the first member of the Galactic Council's forces to understand the terrible truth that would soon reshape the entire galaxy. Humanity did not know how to surrender. They had never learned. And they were about to teach the stars a lesson that would never be forgotten. For 72 hours after their ultimatum, the Valkyrie commanders waited in orbit and watched Earth go silent. No more broadcasts came from the planet below. The radio waves that had once filled the air went quiet. The lights in the cities dimmed and then went dark entirely as power grids shut down one by one. Commander Velthax stood on the bridge of his flagship and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was how it always happened with primitive species. First came the defiance, then the silence, and finally the surrender. "They have accepted their fate," he announced to his officers, his scales shifting to the deep purple of victory. "Begin landing operations. Secure the coastal population centers first, then move inland. I want full control of this planet within 10 standard days." The first dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal rain, their engines screaming as they burned through the clouds. Each ship carried 100 Valkyrie soldiers, each soldier armed with weapons that could vaporize a human with a single shot. Each one eager to add another conquered world to their empire's long list of victories. They landed in empty cities. The streets of New York were deserted. The highways of Tokyo lay silent. The great squares of Moscow and Beijing and London held nothing but abandoned cars and scattered belongings. It was as if 8 billion people had simply vanished into thin air. "Where are they?" demanded squad leader Kethra as she led her soldiers through the empty streets of Sydney, her weapon raised and ready, her 4 eyes scanning every shadow. The scan showed billions of life signs just hours ago. Where did they all go? The answer came not in words, but in fire. The first explosion ripped through the Valkyrie formation without warning, sending bodies flying through the air like leaves in a storm. The second explosion came before the survivors could even react, and the third came immediately after that, and then the humans emerged. They came from everywhere at once, from subway tunnels and basement shelters, from sewers and bunkers and hidden passages that have been built during centuries of preparing for wars that never came. They came with weapons that should have been laughable. Rifles and pistols and explosives cobbled together from household chemicals. But they came with something the Valkyrie had never faced before. Absolute, burning, unstoppable fury. Kethra watched in horror as her soldiers fell one by one, picked off by enemies they could barely see. The humans moved like ghosts through their own cities, using every building and every street corner as cover, striking fast and vanishing before the Valkyrie could return fire. "Fall back." She screamed into her communicator. "Fall back to the dropship. We need reinforcements. We need—" A bullet took her in the throat before she could finish the sentence. Across the planet, the same scene played out 1,000 times. Valkyrie landing parties that expected to face frightened civilians instead found themselves in a nightmare of urban warfare against an enemy that knew every inch of the battlefield. In the mountains of Afghanistan, old fighters who had spent their lives battling each other turned their expertise against the alien invaders. In the jungles of Vietnam and the forests of Finland, guerrilla tactics that had been perfected over generations were deployed against enemies from the stars. In the frozen wastes of Siberia, hunters who had tracked wolves and bears now hunted prey from another world. The Valkyrie had advanced technology, powerful weapons, and the confidence of a species that had never known defeat. The humans had something better. 10,000 years of practice at killing each other. By the end of the first day, the Valkyrie had lost 2,000 soldiers. By the end of the second day, that number had doubled. By the end of the third day, Commander Velthax was forced to send a message to the Galactic Council that no Valkyrie commander had ever sent before. "We require assistance," he admitted, his scales pale with shame. "The humans are more resistant than anticipated. They fight without logic, without self-preservation, without any regard for their own survival. They throw themselves at our soldiers with explosives strapped to their bodies. They crash their primitive vehicles into our formations. They use children and elderly as fighters. They are—" He paused, searching for the right word, and when he found it, his voice trembled with something that might have been fear. "They are insane." The council received his message with shock and disbelief. The Valkyrie were the finest warriors in the galaxy. Their armies had conquered 100 worlds without significant losses. How could a primitive species with no space fleet and no energy weapons be causing them such trouble? But the council's attention was not on the ground war for long, because something far more alarming was happening in laboratories and workshops across Earth. General Chun had understood from the beginning that courage alone would not save humanity. The humans could fight and die with honor. But eventually, the aliens would win through sheer technological superiority unless something changed. So she gave orders that changed everything. Every captured Valkyrie soldier was taken alive when possible. Every piece of alien technology that fell into human hands was rushed to secret research facilities hidden deep underground. Every scientist and engineer on Earth was drafted into a single desperate project. Learn how the alien technology works, and learn it fast. Dinar Yuki Tanaka led the team that cracked the Valkyrie power cells in just 8 days, working without sleep until she collapsed at her desk and was carried to a cot, where she slept for 3 hours before returning to work. Dinar Obi Okonkwo figured out the principles behind their shield generators in 12 days. Losing 2 fingers in an experiment gone wrong and refusing medical attention until he had finished his calculations. But the greatest breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A 17-year-old girl from Mumbai named Priya Sharma, who had been studying physics before the invasion. She looked at the captured Valkyrie FTL drive and saw something that the alien engineers had never noticed. A flaw in their design that limited its efficiency. A simple mathematical error that had been copied from generation to generation without anyone questioning it. They are using the wrong equation, she told the team of Nobel laureates who had been struggling with the problem for weeks. Her voice quiet but certain. If we correct it, we can make the drive 3 times more efficient. We can go faster than they can, travel farther than they can, strike where they never expect us. The scientist stared at her in disbelief, then checked her math, then checked it again. She was right. 6 weeks after the invasion began, humanity built its first FTL drive. 8 weeks after the invasion began, they had improved it beyond anything the Galactic Council had ever seen. And in her bunker beneath the Alps, General Chun smiled for the first time since the war began. We have been fighting to survive, she told her commanders, her eyes bright with something fierce and hungry. But now we are going to fight to win. Prepare the fleet. It is time to take this war to the stars. Above Earth, Commander Valthax received reports of strange energy signatures coming from the planet's surface. Readings that made no sense. Power levels that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. What are they building down there? He demanded. His science officer studied the data with growing horror. Commander, these readings are consistent with, but that cannot be right. They have only had our technology for weeks. There is no way they could have. Could have what? Valthax roared. The science officer looked up, his scales white with fear. They have built an FTL drive, Commander. And according to these readings, it is faster than ours. Valthax stared at the data, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. Unable to accept that a species they had dismissed as primitive had not only stolen their technology, but improved it in a matter of weeks. And then the first human warship appeared in orbit beside them. Sleek and deadly and bristling with weapons that combined human ingenuity with stolen alien science. The war for Earth was over. The war for the galaxy had just begun. The Galactic Council first understood that something had fundamentally changed when a human ship appeared above Valkar Prime without warning. The vessel was ugly by galactic standards, all sharp angles and brutal lines. Looking more like a weapon than a ship, but it hung motionless in orbit above the Valkyrie homeworld, as if it belonged there, as if it had every right to be there, as if the most powerful military force in that sector of space posed no threat to it at all, Empress. Valkora watched from her palace as her defense. Fleet scrambled to intercept the intruder. Her 4 eyes narrowed with fury. How dare these primitive creatures bring their war to her world? How dare they challenge the might of the Valkyrie Dominion in its own home system? But before her ships could reach firing range, a transmission came through on every frequency, overriding all other signals, forcing itself onto every screen on the planet. Admiral Marcus Webb, looked out at the Valkyrie, people with eyes that had seen too much death. His face marked by scars from the Battle of Singapore, where he had held a bridge against alien soldiers for 17 hours with nothing but a rifle and a refusal to die. His voice was calm and cold as frozen steel. "Empress Valkora, your people came to Earth without warning and tried to take our oceans. You called us a lower species and said our deaths would be acceptable losses. You gave us 48 hours to abandon our homes or face destruction." He paused, and when he smiled, there was no warmth in it at all. "We thought we would return the favor. Check your northern hemisphere." The Empress turned to her advisors, confusion mixing with rage on her scaled face. What is he talking about? What have they done? The answer came within minutes, and it turned the Empress's blood to ice. 3 of the largest freshwater reservoirs on Valkar Prime were empty. Billions of liters of water that had sustained the northern agricultural regions for centuries had simply vanished, teleported away by technology that the Valkyrie themselves had invented but had never imagined using in such a way. Where did it go? The Empress screamed at her scientists. "Where is our water?" Admiral Webb answered for them, his voice still echoing from every screen. "Your water is on Earth now, feeding our dying farmlands, restoring the damage your invasion caused. You tried to take from us, so we took from you. That is what we call fair." And then the human ship vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind nothing but chaos and fear. The Valkyrie Empress immediately contacted the Galactic Council, demanding military support, demanding that the other elder races combine their forces to crush this upstart species before it could cause any more damage. But humanity was not finished. General Chun had understood something crucial about the Council from the very beginning. They were not united by friendship or shared purpose, but by mutual fear and self-interest. Each species distrusted the others, each one jealous of its own secrets, each one terrified of looking weak in front of its rivals. And secrets, Chun knew to be the most powerful weapons of all. Over the following months, human strike teams appeared across Council space like ghosts, striking targets that made no military sense but caused maximum psychological damage on the Keth homeworld. A team of human hackers breached the most secure archive in the galaxy, copying 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge that the Keth had hoarded and denied to other species. Within days, that knowledge was distributed freely across the galactic network, available to anyone who wanted it. The Keth were outraged. But their rage was nothing compared to their shame when the galaxy learned the truth. The Keth had been stealing technology from other species for millennia, claiming it as their own invention, building their reputation as the wisest beings in the galaxy on a foundation of lies and theft. On Elthis, a different kind of strike exposed the Dominarch's hidden pleasure gardens, where he kept members of lesser species as living decorations for his amusement. The images spread across the network like wildfire, and the Dominarch's own people rose up in disgust, forcing him to abdicate in shame. But the most devastating blow came when humanity released the Council's own classified records to the entire galaxy. For 10,000 years, the Council had harvested the resources of species they deemed inferior, relocating populations, stripping planets bare, and justifying it all as necessary for the greater good of galactic civilization. The files revealed the truth. The Council had destroyed over 200 species entirely, erased them from existence because they stood in the way of progress, or simply because their worlds contained resources that the elder races wanted. The files contained images, testimonies, records of atrocities that would have made the worst human dictators seem merciful by comparison, and now every species in the galaxy knew. The Council scrambled to respond, trying to dismiss the records as human forgeries, trying to explain away the evidence, trying to restore their shattered credibility. But it was too late. On 100 worlds, species that had lived under council rule for thousands of years began to question their masters. Protests erupted on colony planets. Trade routes were disrupted by strikes and boycotts. The carefully maintained order of galactic civilization began to crack at the seams, and through it all, human forces struck again and again, never where the council expected. Never using tactics that made sense by galactic military doctrine. Ambassador Soren, who had first proposed the harvesting of Earth, found his personal communications leaked to the public, including messages where he laughed about the deaths of human children and boasted about the bribes he had taken from mining corporations. He was torn apart by an angry mob on his own homeworld before council security could reach him. The council held an emergency session, their ancient faces drawn with fear and confusion. "How are they doing this?" demanded the Keth representative, its crystalline shell flickering with distress. "They had no fleet 6 months ago. They had no FTL capability. They were centuries behind us in every measurable way. How have they turned the galaxy against us so quickly?" The answer came from an unlikely source. A Bay council analyst who had spent months studying human culture and history. "They have practice," she explained, her voice quiet with something that might have been respect. "Humans have been fighting each other for their entire existence. They have developed forms of warfare we never imagined. They do not just attack military targets. They attack morale, reputation, alliances, belief systems." She paused, searching for the right words. "They call it psychological warfare, and they have been perfecting it for 10,000 years. We have powerful weapons, but they understand how to use power in ways we never considered. They are not just trying to defeat us." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They are trying to destroy everything we have built." The council members looked at each other, and for the first time, they began to understand the true scope of their mistake. They had thought they were dealing with a primitive species that could be crushed with superior technology. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous, a species that had spent its entire existence fighting for survival, that had turned war into an art form, that understood power not just as force, but as fear, as belief, as the ability to make your enemies doubt everything they thought they knew. And now that species was coming for them. General Chun received the reports of council panic with grim satisfaction. "They are beginning to understand," she told Admiral Webb, "but understanding is not enough. We need them to know, truly know, that they can never do this to anyone again." She turned to the tactical display that showed the location of Sanctum Station, the heart of council power. "Prepare the fleet. It is time to end this." Sanctum Station hung in orbit around a dying star, a massive structure of metal and crystal that had served as the seat of galactic government for over 10,000 years. No species had ever attacked it. The very idea was unthinkable, like a child raising its hand against a god. The station was protected by the combined might of all 12 council species, by defense systems that could destroy entire fleets, by the simple understanding that anyone foolish enough to challenge council power directly would be erased from existence. And then the humans came. 200 warships merged from FTL in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the dark metal of Earth's forges, their weapon systems humming with stolen technology that human engineers had improved beyond anything the council had ever seen. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiance, her eyes fixed on the massive station ahead. Beside her stood Admiral Webb and the commanders of every human battle group, men and women who had fought their way up from the ground war on Earth, who had watched friends and family die under alien weapons, who carried the rage of their species in their hearts. "All ships," Chun said, her voice calm and steady. "This is Admiral Chun. You know why we are here. You know what they did to our world. You know what they have done to hundreds of worlds before ours." She paused, letting the weight of history settle over the fleet. Today we end it. Today we show them that the era of the Council is over. Today we fight not just for Earth, but for every species they have ever wronged. All ships, attack. The Battle of Sanctum's Gate had begun. The Council's defense fleet outnumbered the humans 3-1, and their ships were larger, more powerful, equipped with weapons that had been refined over millennia of galactic warfare. By every measure that the elder races used to predict battle outcomes, the human fleet should have been destroyed within minutes, but humans did not fight by galactic rules. The first wave of human ships did not try to engage the enemy fleet at all. Instead, they accelerated to maximum speed and dove straight through the defensive formation, taking fire from all sides, losing ship after ship to the overwhelming barrage. "They are insane," shouted a council commander, watching the human ships burn as they passed through his lines. "What are they trying to accomplish? They cannot reach the station through our defenses. They are throwing their lives away for nothing." But the human ships were not aiming for the station. They were aiming for the shield generators that protected it. The Council had never considered that anyone would sacrifice entire ships just to deliver a single payload. They had never imagined the crews would volunteer to fly burning, crippled vessels directly into critical infrastructure. They had never faced an enemy that valued victory more than survival. The first shield generator exploded as a human frigate, its crew already dead from radiation exposure, crashed directly into its power core. The second generator followed moments later when 3 human fighters, moving too fast for the defense systems to track, detonated their own reactors at point-blank range. And then the real battle began. Human Marines, wearing suits of armor that combined Earth engineering with stolen Valkyrie technology, launched themselves through the gaps in the station's defenses. They flew through space on nothing but thruster packs and courage, landing on the station's hull and cutting their way inside with plasma torches. The fighting inside Sanctum was brutal beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human soldiers moved through the corridors in tight formations, covering each other, sacrificing themselves to save their squadmates, pushing forward through fire and blood and death with a determination that the elder races could not comprehend. A Keth Guardian, its crystalline body crackling with psychic energy, tried to stop a human advance by overwhelming their minds with terror. The humans felt the fear, acknowledged it, and kept moving forward anyway, because they had learned long ago that courage was not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you. A squad of Valkyrie elite soldiers cornered a group of human Marines in a cargo bay, outnumbering them 5-1 with superior weapons and training. The Marines fought until their ammunition ran out, then fought with knives and fists and teeth, and when the last Marine fell, she detonated a grenade she had been holding in her hand, taking a dozen enemies with her. "They do not surrender," a Valkyrie officer reported to his commanders, his voice shaking. "They do not retreat. They fight until they are dead, and then their deaths kill more of us. We cannot." His transmission cut off as another explosion rocked the corridor. Outside the station, the space battle had turned into chaos. Human captains employed tactics that the elder races considered impossible, ramming their ships into enemy vessels, ejecting their crews in escape pods, and then using the empty ships as guided missiles, flying directly into the exhaust ports of council carriers to deliver bombs to their engine cores. Admiral Webb led a squadron of destroyers in a maneuver that military historians would study for centuries. He pretended to retreat, drawing the Council's heaviest battleships away from the station, then had his ships drop out of FTL directly behind the pursuing fleet, catching them between 2 walls of fire. The Council commanders could not adapt. Their tactics were based on 10,000 years of fighting enemies who followed rules, who valued their own survival, who could be predicted and countered. They had no protocols for facing enemies who seemed to welcome death, who treated their own ships as ammunition. who fought with a fury that bordered on madness on the third day of the battle. The first council ships began to retreat without orders. On the fifth day, a Valkyrie carrier's crew mutinied rather than face another human boarding action, turning their weapons on their own officers before surrendering to the human fleet. On the seventh day, the Keth representatives sent a secret message to Admiral Chun, offering to betray the council in exchange for mercy. By the 11th day, the Battle of Sanctum's Gate was over. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her ship battered and burning, its hull breached in a dozen places, half its crew dead or wounded, but still flying, still fighting, still unbroken. Before her, through the shattered viewport, Sanctum Station hung in space, its weapons silent, its shields down, its masters waiting inside for judgment. She opened a channel to the council chambers, where the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in terrified silence. And she spoke words that would echo through history. You called us primitive. You called us insignificant. You tried to take everything from us because you believed we could not stop you. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of 8 billion souls who had been marked for death by creatures who saw them as nothing. You were wrong. And now you will answer for 10,000 years of harvesting. Every species you destroyed, every world you stripped bare, every life you deemed acceptable losses, humanity demands an accounting. The council looked at each other, these ancient beings who had never known fear, who had ruled the galaxy since before humanity learned to make fire, and for the first time in 10,000 years. They understood what it felt like to be small, to be helpless, to be at the mercy of powers beyond their control. They understood what it felt like to be prey. And they knew, with absolute certainty, that the galaxy would never be the same again. The Treaty of Sanctum was signed 9 months after the battle, in a chamber that still bore the scars of human weapons and human fury. The Galactic Council sat at their ancient table for the last time as rulers. Around them stood representatives of 100 species, beings from worlds that had been conquered and harvested and forgotten, species that had lived under council control for millennia, without ever being allowed to speak, and at the head of the table, in a chair that had been placed there specifically for this moment, sat Ambassador James Okonkwo of Earth. He was young by galactic standards, barely 60 years old, with gray hair and dark skin and eyes that had seen too much war. His father had died in the Battle of Lagos, his mother in the Siege of Nairobi, his sister in the final assault on Sanctum Station. But when he spoke, his voice held no hatred, only the calm certainty of a species that had proven itself beyond any doubt. The old order is finished. The time when a few powerful species could decide the fate of billions without their consent is over. Today we build something new. The council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but none of them dared to object. Behind Ambassador Okonkwo stood Admiral Chun, now fleet commander of the combined human forces, her uniform decorated with medals from battles that would be remembered for centuries. Beside her stood Admiral Webb and General Tanaka and a dozen other heroes of the war, and behind them, visible through the chamber's viewports, hung the human fleet, 200 warships that had broken the back of galactic tyranny, their hulls still scarred from the fighting, their crews still ready for battle if battle was needed. The treaty established the Assembly of Voices, a new governing body where every species in the galaxy would have an equal vote, regardless of their technology or military power or how long they had traveled among the stars. The council would remain, but only as advisors, their role reduced from rulers to servants of the greater community. They would use their ancient knowledge and vast resources to help other species develop, to right the wrongs of 10,000 years, to prove that they had learned from their mistakes. But first, there would be justice. The Valkyrie Empress was the first to face trial, charged with crimes against sentient life for her role in the attempted harvesting of Earth. Her own people demanded the right to judge her. And humanity agreed. She stood before a court of Valkyrie citizens, ordinary beings who had never known the full extent of what their leaders had done in their name. And she listened as witness after witness described the horrors that had been committed across the galaxy. Worlds stripped of water and air. Populations relocated to camps where millions died. Entire species erased from existence because they happened to live on resource-rich planets. The Empress tried to defend herself, tried to claim that she had only done what was necessary for the survival of her people, but the evidence was overwhelming. She was found guilty and sentenced to life in a prison on a moon that the Valkyrie had once used to house lesser species awaiting harvesting. She would spend the rest of her days in the same conditions that she had condemned others to. A living reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. She was the first of many. Across council space, leaders and commanders and bureaucrats who had participated in the harvesting faced justice. Some were tried by their own people, others by the species they had wronged, and a few, the worst of the worst, were tried by humanity itself. The trials lasted years, but they were necessary. The galaxy needed to see that the new order was serious, that crimes would be punished, that the era of impunity was truly over. And while the trials continued, humanity began the work of rebuilding. Earth's oceans were restored. The stolen water returned from Valkar Prime, along with reparations in technology and resources. The cities that had been destroyed in the fighting were rebuilt, better and stronger than before. The soldiers who had fought in the war came home to parades and celebrations and the grateful tears of those they had protected. But humanity did not forget what had happened. They could not afford to forget. General Chun, now retired from military service, traveled across the galaxy speaking to young people of every species, telling them the story of Earth's war, reminding them that freedom is never given but always fought for. She became a symbol of resistance, an inspiration to beings who had never dared to dream that they could stand. Against Tyranny, Ambassador Okonkwo gave the inaugural address to the first full session of the Assembly of Voices, speaking to representatives of 300 species who had gathered to build a new future together. He spoke of cooperation, of shared destiny, of the potential for genuine peace among the stars. He spoke of trade and culture and the exchange of knowledge. He spoke of a galaxy where every species could flourish, where no one would ever again be deemed acceptable losses for the benefit of the powerful. But he ended with a warning that would echo through galactic history for generations to come. Humanity did not seek this war. We did not want this power. We were content to explore our own solar system, to solve our own problems, to make our own way among the stars without bothering anyone else. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was soft but carried to every corner of the chamber. But when you came for us, when you tried to take everything we had, we discovered something about ourselves that we had almost forgotten. We discovered that we are survivors, that we have been fighting for our existence since our ancestors first stood upright on the African savanna, that we carry within us the fury of a species that has clawed its way up from nothing and will not be pushed back down. We will be your partners. We will be your allies. We will be your friends. We will share our knowledge and our resources and our dreams with anyone who asks. His eyes hardened. And suddenly the diplomat was gone, replaced by something older and fiercer. But never again test whether we can be your victims. You will not like the answer. The chamber was silent, and in that silence, the representatives of 300 species understood something that would shape galactic civilization for eons to come. Humanity was not just another species to be catalogued and categorized. Humanity was something new, something unprecedented, a force of nature that could build or destroy with equal passion. In the centuries that followed, humans spread across the galaxy as traders and diplomats and scientists and artists. They shared their music and their stories and their strange, fierce love of freedom. They became known not as conquerors but as guardians, protectors of the weak, champions of the voiceless, but on every world, in every council chamber, in every species' collective memory, one truth remained carved in stone and stars. Do not threaten the children of Earth. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness. Do not assume that because they choose peace, they are incapable of war. The Galactic Council had made that mistake once. Once was enough. And in history books across the galaxy, the story of Earth's rage became a lesson taught to every generation. When you see a small species struggling to survive on a harsh world, when you see beings who fight among themselves and seem chaotic and primitive and insignificant, do not dismiss them. Do not underestimate them. Do not wake the wolves, because once awakened, they do not stop until the fight is finished, and they have been fighting for a very, very long time. The stars themselves learned to respect the small blue world called Earth, and its strange, fierce, beautiful, terrifying inhabitants, the humans, who had come from nothing, who had been given nothing, and who had taken their place among the stars not because they were granted permission, but because they refused with every fiber of their being, with every drop of their blood, with every breath in their bodies to accept anything less than equality. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. That was humanity's warning. And that was humanity's promise. We will never forget what we are capable of, even when we choose to be kind, and neither should you.